Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the Art Table again today. There is a perennial topic that comes up among independent creators. The question is, why don't they want anything new? All of us who are out here trying to make our own thing are often mystified when we encounter people who say, I'm sick and tired of this kind of stuff I see on TV or in movies. I don't find it interesting. I don't find it entertaining. Why can't I get something fun? However, when you offer them a whole slew of new titles of books, of comics, of radio plays, or podcasts that they could dig into, they are invariably uninterested. Many creators find this inherently frustrating, and those that don't still find it very confusing. What leads to this apparent contradiction? Many people will cite nostalgia or just the desire to re-experience something as the actual source of this complaint. People aren't looking to experience something new, they just want to relive their childhood, we are told. And I think there is some truth to that, but I also think that many creators are really missing the point of these cultural touchstones that people are complaining about. Let's take Star Wars as an example. Most people feel that Star Wars has largely lost its way. It's not a fun space adventure series anymore, and it doesn't have the same charm that made George Lucas's original trilogy so popular and successful in the late 70s and early 80s. That's fair enough. However, why aren't people eager to replace it with something like, say, Galaxy's Edge, which has a band of plucky rebels and misfits running around a galaxy run by a very oppressive empire? Well, for starters, Galaxy's Edge is a series of books. It's not a series of movies. And I know that sounds like a meaningless comparison, but it's not. At the time that Star Wars came out, movies were at the forefront of pop culture. Books are not currently at the forefront of pop culture. They do allow for the most creativity in the creation of culture, but they are not at the forefront of pop culture, so they're not going to capture the imagination in the same way a series of movies would. It also requires a lot more investment of time, of attention, of energy into getting something out of it, and it's a lot harder to share with other people for those very reasons. Beyond that, Star Wars is a movie that is really aimed at very understandable things, especially for the time period it was written in. Luke was a farm boy, a very recognizable archetype, especially to people who grew up in the 50s and 60s. Han Solo was a cargo runner. Yes, he was a smuggler on top of that, but he was essentially a truck driver in outer space, and that was an archetype people very easily resonated with. Everybody knew at least a few truckers, and even if you didn't, you could look out your window and see them doing their jobs everywhere around you. Galaxy's Edge, on the other hand, is very much a military sci-fi franchise. The primary characters are soldiers or militia members. This is an idea that is much more removed from modern-day culture. We don't see soldiers out there doing their jobs very often. They are confined to military bases in the United States, and when they go to war, on the rare occasions where they do go to war, they go to far-flung countries. They don't go to war here in our own nation, which is, all things considered, a positive. But it does make them less instantly relatable as characters in a story. Now, that doesn't mean that soldiers have no place in our fiction. Obviously they do, a very important one. But they cannot fill the same place as the soldier did in, say, the 50s or 60s. In the aftermath of World War II and the Korean War, soldiers were something that every American was familiar with. They knew the ins and outs and rhythms of their life. They could easily relate to them. They understood something of what it meant for them to go away to war. Even if they hadn't been a soldier themselves, they knew someone who had left their family and come back very changed or never come back at all. That is a cultural context which we don't have anymore, and makes it much harder for people to adopt something like Galaxy's Edge as a cultural touchstone. And believe you me, what people are looking for when they say they want fun entertainment is they are looking for something to serve as a cultural touchstone, both forwards and backwards. Star Wars succeeded as a media franchise by reaching backwards into the storytelling history of Hollywood. George Lucas ripped off serials in a lot of different ways. He also took a lot from cowboy movies and samurai movies, which he had really enjoyed when he was younger. He was not just telling his own story, he was building into that story cultural touchstones that he loved when he was younger. While much has been made of how many of those touchstones felt empty in his prequel trilogy, and I tend to agree with some of that critique, the point is he was trying to craft his story while also connecting it to other stories that his audience would already know well, thus building their engagement with his story not only from the things he was telling them, but from things he knew was already in the cultural consciousness. Even when George Lucas failed to do a good job of telling his own story, we can see how well his ability to grasp resonant moments of culture came off in the prevalence of prequel memes. The prequels were chock full of moments that grasped moments of universal human significance in a visual format, and made it possible to represent those moments very effectively in any context. That's why you have all of these memes. People saw moments in those movies that resonated with all parts of life, and that is why I think they are still so fondly regarded by so many people when the sequel trilogy has largely ceased even being a topic of derision. You can see why this works in another science fiction franchise, Star Trek. In the 5th season of Star Trek The Next Generation, there's an episode just called Darmok. This episode revolves around people whose language consists entirely of memes. The central theme of this episode is summed up in the phrase Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. Darmok and Jalad is a story about enemies who meet under extreme adversity, overcome that adversity, and leave it as friends. This story comes from Tamarian culture, the aliens that the Enterprise crew is dealing with in the episode. And they have distilled the story to a single idea, to the point where simply saying Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra encompasses an entire idea that they are trying to convey to others. And it is not a simple idea, it is a very complicated idea, full of ways to approach problems and overcome them. This powerful, mimetic way of conveying ideas is not really a good foundation for an entire language, but it is a vitally important part of culture. I've said before on this channel that I really do think that the best stories are incredibly deliberate about how they are constructed and what it is they wish to tell others. The mimetic properties of your story is a vitally important part of constructing that story. After all, if you want to make a complete story circle, you have to tell a story that can easily be recalled and retold by your audience. Because in the story circle, your audience moves from the audience to the storyteller over time. When our culture was healthy, the story circle turned constantly. George Lucas became a storyteller because he was in the audience for Flash Gordon serials. Flash Gordon serials were created by people who had read Flash Gordon, or when they were younger had read H.G. Wells, or perhaps Edgar Allan Poe, and on the story circle rolls back in time. However, when you look at the people who are making our culture now, they are almost never a part of the story circle for the stories they are actually telling. There is little evidence that Mindy Kaling was a huge fan of Scooby-Doo, or even that she's watched a lot of the show. The same is true of the people who seem to have made the Rings of Power, The Wheel of Time, Willow, The Witcher, and any number of other pop culture franchises that have really gone downhill over the last 10 years or so. It is this break in the story circle, I think, that really causes people to become uninvested from these big franchises and from these kinds of stories that they have always loved. Now, there's nothing wrong with trying to bring these people into a new story circle. But building a new tradition of story from scratch is incredibly difficult. It can be done. It is a worthwhile endeavor. However, it takes years and years and years of constant effort to build up that story circle, for people to go from audience to new storyteller, and for the cycle to repeat over and over in the way that really gave some of our cultural touchstones the resonance and power to attract people that they had. The path backwards from George Lucas through Sergio Leone, through Flash Gordon, through The Shadow, through Edgar Rice Burroughs is very long. It is very complicated. It is very fraught. It was very difficult. the independent storyteller or the Iron Age creator will not have the power of Darmok and Jalad right out of the gate. We may not even have it in our lifetime. Nor is it correct, I think, to blame people for wanting that power, that resonance in their storytelling. The fact is, the majority of people are not attracted to stories because of the craftsmanship in the storytelling, unfortunately. Rather, they are attracted by the power of the story circle. There is a kind of magic, there is a kind of cachet, there is a kind of weight and presence to an unbroken tradition of storytelling that you cannot remake with a snap of your fingers. And what can I say? For my part, the fact that it is such a difficult task ahead of us is part of what makes me so excited for it. Yes, I'm sure I will be frustrated as well in the future, as I have been in the past. But I understand that this is what people want. They don't want something new. They want something new that spirals up out of the old, that takes the old storytelling tradition and rotates it one notch further, keeping it in tune with the moment, but also bringing with it all of the weight, power, and grandeur of the old, that finds them where they are and shows how it all spirals back to a point at the beginning where all stories spring from. That incredible arc of the story circle has been badly damaged in our modern culture, and rebuilding it, recapturing that power and weight and grandeur is going to be the work of a lifetime. I wouldn't be here if it was not such a great undertaking. Most people will not see it for what it is until we are done. And until we get there, bear with them for just a little while longer. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button. You can use those as you see fit. And I'll talk to you later.